Welcome back to high school. Welcome back to high school. Apologize for the technical difficulties on my last stream, but hey, we back in there again. Um, I am your captain speaking, Dr. Quincy Brewington, also known as the High Scholar. Getting back in here talking about motivation, educational psychology, and the things that we do. Um, Last time had a conversation. We jumped in asking the question: Are black males self-motivated? Are black boys and black men self-motivated? And what we did with that was we started our conversation with a conversation of self-determination theory. Self-determination theory is one of our macro theories of human motivation, introduced in the 1980s by Deci and Ryan. And we're gonna go back to that question: Are black males self-motivated? Because I really feel like I didn't do you guys justice in what Desi and Ryan has presented to us. So we were presented with two articles last time. We're really gonna focus in on one. Um, but before we get into that, what I want to make sure I go over is what high school is all about. So high school is a show, podcast, whatever you want to call it. I haven't figured out what it is quite yet. But here on this um, apparatus here. We cover theories and research in motivation and motivation processes, focusing particularly on black males. The purpose of this show is to broaden insights into cultural differences and deeper understanding of social behaviors as it relates to individual and group psychological processes. In this program, we investigate how and why diverse groups, especially black males, behave in similar and dissimilar ways. Our supreme goal is to remind people, including black boys and men themselves, of black male humanity. So thank you all for joining me here today on this 420 afternoon. Hope everybody has caught their flights, everybody is sipping their tea, and everyone is enjoying a little peach with their herb. Please like, share, or subscribe to this video. If you'd like to support me beyond just these lectures, feel free to hit the Cash App at Dr. QB. So we're going to dive back into this question of, are black men self-motivated? Last time we were introduced to self-determination theory, and as I said before, it is a macro theory introduced in the 1980s to really explain motivation in this humanistic, dialectical, and organismic way. In other words, self-determination theory tries to look at human beings as a species, as an entire species, and what all human beings possess as it relates to motivation. It's dialectical. In other words, there's a conversation not only about the person or people involved in motivation, but also a conversation of the environment that people are a part of. And that's also going to incorporate the organismic focus that self-determination theory has. As I said before, self-determination theory was introduced into the 90s. SDT was introduced in the 1980s. And it takes on in the 1980s, but I didn't talk a lot about last time what motivation theory was talking about prior to that. So prior to the 1980s and the introduction to SDT by Deci and Ryan, motivation is really dominated as far as motivation theory by conversation of achievement. And achievement theory, achievement motivation theory, were produced or introduced into academia by McClellan and on the heels of Atkinson. So Atkinson and McClellan was the student of Atkinson. Um, but achievement motivation was very limited. In other words, either you had it or you don't. And a lot of times when people talk about motivation in current terms, they still kind of use these terms like um, either you're driven to achieve or you don't, or you're driven, you got the juice or you don't. And one thing I find is that the reason why SDT comes into conversation even in the 1980s is achievement motivation is very limited in how it saw achievement. It defined achievement, and we needed more theories to understand how people see achievement, define achievement, the impact that groups have on these individuals. So achievement motivation is very individualistic. Um, and just being frank, if you weren't white and or male, you had some derivative of a lesser than achievement motivation, or you were lesser driven to achieve, according to the psychologists prior to the 1980s. What Deci and Ryan present here is really this profound idea in the 1980s that everybody's motivated. Everybody's motivated, and they're just dynamics around them that will truncate or limit their own internal or individual intrinsic motivation, um, or there's some factors in the exterior world, the extrinsic motivation, that are pulling people to be motivated. So what I want to do in this podcast, and again, I'm not going to stay over here for longer than 45, 55 minutes or an hour, is really dive back into the article and do more of a justice to this self-determination theory and try to answer, using this article, are black males self-motivated? All right, give me a second to go ahead and get ready to share my screen. We're almost there. Give me 2 more seconds. There we go. There we go. Now we're cooking with grease. All right. So here we go. This article was published in the Canadian Psychology in 2008. I know that seems a little dated, but my field of education psychology and human motivation theory moves a little slower than some of our other fields. So the title of this article is Self-Determination Theory and Macro Theory of Human Motivation, Development, and Health. And what I'm going to do is try to go over some points in the article that I would like to make. And we're going to really still be trying to answer this question of, are black males self-motivated? And we're going to use self-determination theory as the basis theory to answer this question. So as you see in the abstract or overview of the article, that's that first part of the article here. It gives a definition and an overview of what you're going to find in this article. And I like to use this article because it's a great overview of the theory and its functionality in our current conversation of, are black males, or anybody for that matter, motivated? So what self-determination theory tries to do is address the social conditions that enhance versus diminish these types of motivation, proposing and finding the degrees to which basic psychological needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness are supported or thwarted affect the type and strength of motivation. So what SDT tries to do is try to really investigate what in the environment is undercutting your own juice, your own gumption, your own movement towards whatever goals, tasks, or that are placed in front of you. So what's SET, like I said before, recognize that all humans are motivated, but there are going to be things that enhance your motivation or diminish your motivation. You being motivated is going to fulfill your basic psychological needs. And not only is it going to fulfill your basic psychological needs, but it's going to relate to these certain concepts like autonomy, you doing things through your own volition or your own want or energy to do so. Having competence, you using your knowledge, your brain, and you feeling like you connect with people in the environment will actually help to support or diminish your own motivation in any situation. And the good thing about SDT as a macro theory is it's not looking just like at people who are motivated. So achieving motivation that was introduced prior only looked at people who were doing really well, completing tasks and accomplishing goals, and it never had a conversation of people who weren't. It just said, well, they don't have the juice, they don't have the gumption, they don't have what they need, the relevant skills they need, or relevant energy they need, volition they need to complete what they're trying to accomplish. They are not willing to achieve, is what Achieve Motivation said. SDT says, no, they have the internal compass. There's just something else out there that may be undercutting their wings. And we got to figure out what that is, because basically we say all human beings want a say-so in what they're doing, autonomy, have knowledge of what they're doing or what they're trying to accomplish, incompetence, and want to feel connected to the individuals who are also involved in the environment that they are undertaking. Okay? When you have autonomy, competence, relatedness, or as I say, I use the acronym CAR. When people are allowed to drive their own car, people go very far. But in this situation, and oftentimes in other situations, you find anytime that autonomy, competence, and relatedness are undercut, we have different versions of motivation that would present themselves according to what Deci and Ryan say. Okay, so I want to read this last highlight I have here. So FET within the applied domains is used in work, relationships, parenting, education, virtual environments, which we've delved into during this pandemic a whole lot, sports, sustainability, healthcare, and psychotherapy. Okay, so let's go further into our article again. The name of this article is Self-Determination Theory, a Macro Theory of Human Motivation, Development, and Health. This theory was coined and introduced by Deci and Ryan. And we saw this article last time we had a discussion, and I overviewed it. I skimmed it more than I gave you guys a full breakdown of it, and I wanted to give you guys more justice in this breakdown. Right here on the left side, you see here, this was fully flushed out in the mid-1980s, even though Deci and Ryan were starting to stir these conversations in the 1970s. And I think it's fascinating that SET comes around in the 1980s, and compared to prior theories that were still laden with racism and classism and all the isms that we can imagine, SDT has these kind of platitudes that you can respect. Like all human beings are motivated. I can agree to that because it's not necessarily exclusatory or trying to big up one cultural or ethnic group having some secret sauce that some other group culturally or ethnically do not have. So one thing that happens in this same time period, so SDT is introduced in the 1980s, there's not a lot of conversation of people or culture within motivation in the same way it was being had when achieved motivation was introduced. So achieved motivation probably, and this part is my opinion, but this is my opinion based on research and understanding. Achieved motivation was one of the last that kind of said these people in this ethnic group know how to achieve, and this group right here does not know how to achieve. Once SDT gets introduced, those kind of conversations and finger pointing doesn't happen as often. So when we say all people are motivated, that message didn't really reach the same ears as the achieved motivation theory that said either you got it or you don't. So a lot of people still operate in this kind of paradigm where when I see a student or a young person, I'm a teacher, so that's the people I work with mostly, but even adults, when I see them doing a certain activity, I say they're highly motivated. They know how to get things done. And then when I see somebody being slothful or moving slow, I say, listen, that's the person that you don't need to be looking at. They don't know how to get things done. They're not motivated as compared to this other person. That's still a very achievement motivation way of looking at somebody being motivated. When we start approaching it as if all human beings are motivated and if they have competence, relatedness, as well as autonomy, they're going to be able to accomplish their goals and complete tasks. When that conversation started being had, we don't start pointing to those same groups that we called out before and say, look, we were wrong. You know how to achieve. There's something going on in the context. There's something going on in the context that's undercutting your drive to or your energy to achieve. And I think that's something that I'm very critical of in psychological theory. Like, no, if you're willing to call people out that they like delayed gratification and that they don't know how to wait and they don't know how to maintain motivation over long periods of time, you need to come right back and say that you were wrong and do the studies psychologically that validate that SDT applies to them. And that's what I really tried to do in my own work and still try to do. All right, so I'm going to move over to this right side here and start diving into some more of my highlights. Again, this is a quick article. It's about 4 pages, but it does a great job of overviewing what Deci and Ryan have done over the last 20, 30 years as it relates to self-determination as a theory in motivation, psychological motivation. All right. So starting here in our yellow area on the right side, differentiating motivation. Whereas many historical and contemporary theories of motivation have treated motivation primarily as a unitary concept, focusing on the overall amount of motivation that people have for particular behaviors or activities. So what they say here so far is just what I've finished explaining, which was prior to the 1980s and late 70s, and when you think about theories of achievement motivation and attribution, it approached motivation as this kind of single one-way concept. So there was only one way to be motivated, and if you were going the opposite direction, you were unmotivated. That's really the binary and unitary concept they're talking about here. Like people didn't know how to understand you may be, not so motivated in a classroom, but you may show and drive through, run through a wall on a sports field or in a basketball or football space, so or a baseball diamond or anything, or even in board games. If we want to go something more simple, they couldn't understand using achievement motivation theory or just purely attribution as a concept, how people could display different behaviors in different environments because the environment wasn't being taken into consideration. Okay, let's continue on. So what SCTV tried to do is began differentiating types of motivation. The initial idea was that the type or quality of a person's motivation would be more important than the total amount of motivation for predicting many important outcomes, such as psychological health and well-being, effective performance, creative problem solving, and deep or conceptual learning. And that really speaks to why I'm having this conversation to begin with. When we ask ourselves, are Black males self-motivated? Being motivated is a human right. Being motivated is a human characteristic. Some of the outcomes of being motivated are psychological health and well-being. So when we start having conversations of mental health and why people are not doing so well and holding themselves to a certain well-being that we want human beings to have access to, ask yourself, are they being put in environments where their intrinsic motivation, their self-determined motivation supported? I'll wait. So when we start having a conversation of psychological health and well-being, we have to have a conversation of motivation as well. Effective performance. One of the main things that I talk about as a educator is if you want people to perform well, we have to make sure they're motivated. Okay. If not, we are just forcing them to perform. If you want them to perform effectively, you have to make sure that their self-determined motivation is what's being activated. You can't force them. You can't make people comply and then expect effective performance. And the last two, as an educator, you gotta give it up for creative problem solving and deeper conceptual learning. So these are things that normally don't come up in motivation conversation. Motivation is seen as this kind of energy or juice that you're supposed to use whenever you need it. But no one really talks about how being motivated and having this access to your own self-determined motivation not only will help you be, healthy psychologically, will not only help you perform at work or at school or in sport better, but you actually will think better. Your brain will work better because you're motivated. And that's why I'm asking this question. Are Black men self-motivated? Because are they being allowed the psychological health and well-being, effective performance, creative problem solving, and deep or conceptual learning that comes with people whose personal motivation is being respected and being honored and actually being used in the fabric of society? Okay. Well, let's move forward because, excuse me, our next part of our conversation that we're going to go down to, because we hit those two yellow highlights, is going to go down to our next paragraph under differentiating motivation. Okay. Like I said before, excuse me, I'm not going to stay on here long, a good 40, 45, 55 minutes. I don't ever want to be on here longer than a normal class period to make it, something that you can listen to really quickly, a quick ride, or catch pieces of, and it's more convenient for you all. But hey, let's get back to it. So our next paragraph starts off by saying the most central distinction in SDT is between autonomous motivation and controlled motivation. So Deci and Ryan really believe in two types of motivation, autonomous and controlled. Autonomous motivation comprises of both intrinsic motivation and the types of extrinsic motivation in which people have identified with an activity's value and ideally will have integrated into their sense of self. So autonomous motivation, according to them, was going to not only identify with something internally with the people, but even what happens in the environment. The external factors will match up with and connect with the person's value system and their sense of who they are. So when people in this type of motivation, autonomous motivation, according to Deci and Ryan, when they actually feel autonomously motivated, they're going to not only see value in whatever the goal or task is being asked to be completed, but they're also going to feel a certain sense of who they are is connected to the activity, the goal, the task before them. Okay? Continuing on, when people are autonomously motivated, they experience volition or self-endorsement of their actions. Okay? Volition is important because volition is going to lead to vitality, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But as I continue to read, we're already, starting to get into the two types of motivation. And again, that's why I had to come back and give it to you all one more time because I didn't really dig in on are black males self-motivated. And I said, I gave my answer by the end. I'll give that same answer again today, but I'm going to give a little bit more meat to that bone on why I feel that way. Okay, and not just feel that way, why I know what is going on is what it is. Okay, moving forward, continuing to read. Controlled motivation, in contrast, consists of both external regulation, in which one's behavior is a function of external contingencies of reward or punishment, and introjective regulation, in which the regulation of an action has been partially internalized and is energized by factors such as an approval motive, avoidance of shame, contingent self-esteem, and ego involvements. All right, so this form of motivation, this second type of motivation presented by Desi and Ryan, is controlled. In other words, people are motivated in this type. However, it requires everything in the environment, whether that be rewards or punishments, so those external contingencies, some type of introjection into regulation. In other words, you having a security guard or a teacher or someone else around who is going to, you need to get back to doing this to help regulate their behavior. Or if you're going to internally stir up anything in those individuals in controlled motivation, it's going to be they're going to be either seeking approval. So they just want you, who they want to, see as an authority figure, to approve of whatever they're doing. They're trying to avoid shame, so they don't want to be seen as an outcast or pariah. How they see themselves or contingent self-esteem, how they see themselves is attached to the activity, goal, or task. And even one step further, how they want to present themselves to others. So their ego is going to be connected to it as well. So if they want to be seen at a higher esteem, and I use esteem, but I use esteem in a social sense in this situation. They want to be seen. People are going to try to affect the ego. So hey man, you're seen as this type of person, and you're a part of this type of organization, and they don't want to see people who are you want them to see the whole organization as failure. So you got to do these things. They're gonna try to use that ego and those ways of esteem in a social setting to help motivate and push individuals to complete tasks or complete goals, or be involved in activities in different ways. Continuing to read. When people are controlled, they experience pressure to think, feel, or behave in particular ways. Both autonomous and controlled motivation energize and direct behavior, and they stand in contrast to amotivation or akrasia, which refers to a lack of intention and motivation. So it really what Desi and Ryan present is three types of motivation, even though they only say there's two. So there's autonomous, controlled, and that pure lack of motivation and intent, which is amotivated or akrasia. Okay. So you have to ask yourself, are black men experiencing volition or self-endorsement of their goals and tasks and activities that they want to be involved in? Or are individuals and institutions and in the social setting trying to use, rewards or punishment, interjected regulation, in other words, some oversight? Or are they going to try to stir up some of those internal factors like approval, seeking approval, trying to avoid shame, being linked to, my self-esteem being linked to how I perform in this goal or activity? Or are you going to, give me an award? Are you going to, parade me around in front of everybody else, make me feel like I'm the best ever? And that's that ego involvement. Okay. Ask yourself, are black males self-motivated? Are they autonomously motivated, which is the self-motivated according to Desi and Ryan? or is their motivation controlled? I'm going to save my answer for a little bit later. We're about halfway through already. So moving further down, make sure I didn't miss anything for you all. I'm going to keep reading. An enormous amount of research, some of which is reviewed in the papers of this special issue, has confirmed that across domains, autonomous motivation and controlled motivation lead to very different outcomes. I'll say it again. Autonomous motivation and controlled motivation lead to very different outcomes, with autonomous motivation tending to yield greater psychological health, as I said before, and more effective performance on heuristic types of activities. So even the performance on activities that are mundane, that involve other people and conversations that are particular to that one individual, they perform better on. It also leads to greater long-term persistence, for example, maintain change toward healthy behaviors. So as a psychologist and as a teacher, I'm always being asked how to motivate individuals, adults, it doesn't matter, students, it doesn't matter. And they don't really want just the you get up, you get going one day type of motivation. What they really want is persistence. They really want motivation with persistence. In other words, you're going to be motivated for longer terms, longer periods of time. And the only way to accomplish that, according to Deci and Ryan, is through autonomous motivation. It's through the internal, stirrings, the internal energy and vitality, the internal drive the individuals all have being responded to. There cannot be any force or rewards or punishments or extrinsic factors that are going to purely be the basis in which these activities, goals, or tasks are being attended to. Okay? And I'm not going to read this whole article to you. I just want to make sure that was really the meat and potatoes of differentiating between autonomous motivation and controlled motivation. And motivation is important because it is going to lead to a greater psychological health and well-being, which we all need. All human beings are entitled to at their own sense of psychological health and well-being. Okay. All right, moving on to the basic psychological needs section. All right, I'll go ahead and read that first sentence because I want to leave that out for you. Based on years of research on intrinsic motivation or internal motivation and internalization, we have found that a satisfactory account of the various empirical results require the hypothesis that there is a set of universal psychological needs that must be satisfied for effective functioning and psychological health. Subsequent research in a variety of countries, including some cultures with collectivist, traditional values, and others with individualist reading online or reading out loud is always a little harder than reading to yourself. Equalitarian values have confirmed the satisfaction of the needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness do indeed predict psychological health and well-being in all cultures. So part of the reason why I took on SDT as a theory that I would use in my own research is for this reason alone. So SDT tries to, really boil down and drill down into what do all human beings need to move, to get us going, to get us to drive hours, to get us to run distances, to get us to read and lock ourselves into different modes for a certain assessment. What is required? And what they say is it doesn't matter what the goal, task, or activity is. It doesn't matter even what the cultural dynamics of the cultural container they're in. All human beings want to be self-determined. All human beings need this as a predictor of psychological well-being. All human beings need to feel some semblance of knowledgeableness or being fully equipped to complete the activity, task, or goals. They all need to feel like they're doing it through their own volition and their own self-approval. And they need to feel like when I'm in this space with other people, we are connected. We are working to get connected in whatever form they feel. And that's why they use the term relatedness. They want to feel connected in whatever form the culture deems as connect or deems as connectedness. Okay. And they've taken the SDT through different countries, Asian countries, South American countries, African countries, and they have seen when you use these certain concepts of, people driving their own car going to go far, you will see that these will show themselves again and again. Okay. Skipping down to our next paragraph, the concept of human needs turns out to be extremely useful because it produces a means of understanding how various social forces and interpersonal environments affect autonomous versus controlled motivation. Okay, so what they're saying here is if you boil down and focus generally on what human beings need, which is basic psychological, health and well-being, you will see that no matter what space or culture you're in, okay, they're going to be something in the environment that's going to affect whether these people are autonomously motivated or controlled motivation. Okay, every environment has it. That's something that achieving motivation in the 1970s would have never factored for or ever even been able to identify. That no matter what culture you're in, they're going to be factors within the environment. Not only are there going to be tangible material factors that we have to account for, but also people, institutions that we also have to account for as well. Okay. And we're about 30 minutes in, so we're going to continue going on. Like I said, I'm not going to read this entire article to you. You guys are very intelligent on your own. This is a quick 4-pager. I've already read the title to you. Let's talk more about individual differences. Hold on one second. Make sure there's nothing else I want to go over as it relates to basic psychological needs. Okay. I think I beat that one too. It's good and dead. Let's move forward to individual need differences. Okay. Part of the reason we have conversations with individual differences in motivation is that, in psychology, we went through, behaviorism, kind of like trying to, change people's behavior through conditioning. You guys know, about B.F. Skinner as well as Pavlov. Pavlov is a good example of behaviorism. Once we got into cognition and social cognition eras of psychology and psychology study, we start to understand and try to account for individual differences in our conversation of psychology. So instead of trying to say, well, everybody's going to be different, I never accept. I just understand that there's going to be minute, differences, but we got some things we can say all humans need as well. So I'm going to read these first 3 sentences to lead to the highlighted part that I want to talk with you about. All right, many theories of motivation have as their primary individual difference the strength of one or more psychological needs, for example, the need for achievement, for intimacy, or for control. The idea is that needs are learned and that some people develop stronger needs than others. Because SDT maintains that needs for competence, relatedness, and autonomy are basic and universal, the individual differences within the theory do not focus on the varying strength of the needs, but instead focus on the concepts resulting from the degree to which the needs have been satisfied versus thwarted. Okay, that's a mouthful, but really what they're saying is instead of saying that, culturally or ethnically, different people, or even individually, different people have a thirst for achievement or for intimacy or for control, what they say is um, all human beings have this thirst for competence. All human beings have this thirst for relatedness. All human beings have this thirst for autonomy. What you need to look at is to the degree from which they are going to be satisfied or deterred or stopped or thwarted, as they say here, from to the degree that that's going to happen. Their needs are being satisfied or thwarted, as well as the varying strength of those needs. Oh, I'm sorry. I said that wrong. What you don't need to focus on is how powerful those needs for achievement, intimacy, and control are. What you need to focus on is whether their competency, relatedness, and autonomy are being satisfied. Are they truly being satisfied, or are these people having to focus on competence, relatedness, autonomy in order to accomplish their goals, complete activities, or complete tasks? Okay. Again, achievement motivation theory that takes place before this really focused on high achievers doing their best, people at the top of their fields. And SAT kind of says, like, no, we don't need to focus in on that. Everybody wants to be motivated. Everybody wants to complete activities, complete goals, complete tasks. How that happens, the space in which that takes place in, who's around, the resources at your disposal are all going to be factors in which we have to consider for individuals to be motivated or lack motivation. And what they do a good job of at SDT, and I said this in the last show, is hey, you may see an individual, think of them as highly motivated, using a broad concept. They are moving very fast. They're moving feverishly. They're moving without stop. They still can be in a controlled motivation situation because they may be doing it all for the award at the end. We've seen people in more recent times that may be the case. They may be doing it to confirm their own self-esteem. We've seen more recent times that could be the case. Um, all still, they're in a controlled motivation. They're being pointed in a certain direction and told what to do. They're not completing it as good as they could or getting the outcomes they really want because there's not autonomy being present there. Again, I said I keep saying it throughout this one. They don't have the keys to their own car. They're not competent. They don't feel autonomous. They don't feel related. Or one of the three is being questioned or undercut, and that's what this next part really talks about. It talks about how autonomy, control really will play to affect a person's motivation. So causality orientation is where we're going to start this part of our conversation. Causality orientation are general motivational orientations that refer to A, the way people orient to the environment concerning information related to the initiation and regulation of behavior, and thus B, the extent to which they are self-determined in general across situations and domains. There are three orientations: autonomous, controlled, and personal. Development of strong autonomous orientations result from ongoing satisfaction of all three basic needs. Development of a strong control orientation results from some satisfaction of the competence and relatedness needs, but a thwarting of the need for autonomy. So usually in control orientations or control motivation, individuals can be competent, they can have a breadth of knowledge, they can be good at what they're doing with all the knowledge and skills that they have. They can even be connected and feel like people around them want them to be there, want them to be doing this work. But what they do not have is say so or their own volition, their own self-approval in that process. And going back to reading, and the development of the impersonal orientation results from a general thwarting of all three needs. So when things are impersonal, all three, there's not competence is not being considered, autonomy is not being considered, and relatedness is not being considered. I'm gonna go back through that one more time because this really is where our answer comes in. Okay, with these orientations, autonomous, controlled, and impersonal. The development of strong autonomous orientation results are from ongoing satisfaction of all three basic needs. Development of a strong control orientation results from the satisfaction of competence and relatedness, but a thwarting of the need for autonomy. And the development of impersonal orientation results from a general thwarting from all three needs, that being competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Okay? Again, are black males self-motivated? I'll go ahead and be the spoiler right now. No, because at best, when you look at black males in our country, black boys and black men in our country, and how they're expected to perform activities, complete goals, and achieve tasks, what we're going to expect them to do is to be very knowledgeable and competent, okay? Be very skilled in what they're doing, even ingratiate themselves in the groups that they have to work in or groups they have to be a part of. But what we do not want is them to have their own self, ability to direct themselves to what they want to do and what they want society to look like. And that's where our problem comes in. I wouldn't say at this point that we are in a society that is impersonal, okay? Because impersonal doesn't include the competence that is going to be developed, okay, or the relatedness that is required. One thing that I understand about black males is they come from a culture that when relatedness is not present, they can't achieve. Okay, there are certain cultures that are not individualistic. Black males come from a culture that is generally individual collectives, okay, or individual collectivism. So they need to be, identified as an individual, but also need to feel like they connect with others around them. So I wouldn't go so far as to say the causality orientation would be impersonal. However, this part of our conversation has really nailed us into, even at best, with a strong control orientation, we're dealing with individuals whose competence and relatedness are being attended to, but their autonomy is being taken away. We're forcing them to do things. And I mean, I hate to, we all hate to go back to it, but this is where it started in the beginning. The autonomy of individuals being taken away in the slave community, most of those individuals being black males in the slave community, um, even though they would display the competence as well as relatedness, even in the slave community, to those of their group and those not of their racial or ethnic group. Okay. Let's move forward. And again, this is a good article. They give, they go into great detail as to how this, how SDT and the cause how SDT really affects motivation for individuals. This is a great overview of the theory as a whole. All right, moving forward on to aspiration life goals. Again, I'll read that first paragraph to you. Consider empirical work within the SDT tradition has focused on the long-term goals that people use to guide their activities. Empirically, these goals fall into two general categories that have been labeled intrinsic aspiration and extrinsic aspirations, and that's by Cassie and Ryan, 1996. Intrinsic aspirations include life goals as affiliation, generativity, and personal development, whereas extrinsic aspirations include such goals as wealth, fame, and attractiveness. Okay, that's interesting in itself that they even understand that internal life goal is who you're actually going to be in community and network with, how productive and how you contribute to society, as well as how you develop yourself and view that development versus some of those out external or rewards and consequences, which is wealth, fame, and attractiveness, kind of that physical um, or social attractiveness. Numerous studies have revealed that an emphasis on intrinsic goals relative to extrinsic goals is associated with greater health, well-being, and performance. So again, if you want a person to be motivated and be motivated the best way, you need to, appeal to their internal intrinsic motivation, their internal devices, their internal volition, for them to, approve of themselves, make sure that this is something they can integrate into who they are, and they feel a greater sense of self when that happens. This is not something that I say black males get opportunity to be in, especially in this country. I look forward to hearing about more opportunities or spaces where black men have autonomous motivation. But as I see it, and I've interviewed black males in different spaces, even the high achieving ones will talk about how no, there's still somebody pulling my strings and having those expectations, even if it's my cultural group as a whole. And I'll keep to my promises. I said it's only going to be about 45 minutes to an hour. All right, some of the new concepts that are discussed in self-determination theory that are important to also mention. Thus far, we've talked about basic psychological needs, individual differences, origins of causality, and we're going to finish up with mindfulness and energy and vitality. Mindfulness, again, as we start to have more conversation of cognition and social cognition and psychology, the awareness of metacognition and mindfulness became more entrenched in our conversation as well. So I'll actually go ahead and read this paragraph to you, and that'll lead us right into energy and vitality. And SCT has always maintained the development of integrated autonomous functioning depends on awareness. Recently, SCT researchers have begun to incorporate that the idea through studies of mindfulness defined as an open awareness and interested attention to what is happening within and around oneself. Okay? Mindfulness has been associated with autonomous motivation and with a variety of positive psychological and behavioral outcomes. Accordingly, promoting mindfulness or awareness has been theorized to be a central element in psychotherapy and one that allows inner exploration, reflective examination of needs and feelings, and the development of more autonomous orientation. We, Desi and Ryan and Desi, address the matter more fully in our paper on psychotherapy within this special issue. Okay? I'll say that one more time. Um, when you incorporate the ideas of through studies of mindfulness, defined as an open awareness and instant attention to what's happening within and around oneself, mindfulness has been associated with autonomous motivation, with a variety of positive psychological and behavioral outcomes. Okay, so the more the individuals are aware that they're driving their own car, that they're competent, they're autonomous in their decision making and how they are going to complete activities, complete goals, and complete tasks, they're going to do better. They're going to do better because they have an awareness of how these things give them a sense of self. Okay, so as I've said before, um, are black males allowed to be mindful of how they're motivated, or they're just expected to do more? And I honestly believe that the latter is the truth. Like they're expected to do a little bit more in a way that mindfulness is not even being allowed. You're not even being allowed to be aware of what's motivating you, what's being pulling your strings, and even when those things that are pulling your strings start to be exposed, where you can now take autonomy back, um, there's an issue with that. There's always going to be an issue with people who want to use your body but not use your mind, making sure that you're not mindful of how you're being controlled and being directed into different spaces. All right, and our last conversation of new concepts in the SDT as a theory have to do with energy and vitality, and I really wanted to speak to vitality in this, but here we go. Continuing reading. An important aspect of motivation concerns the energization of people's psychological processes and behaviors. Within SDT, the energy for action comes either directly or indirectly from basic psychological needs. And we have been particularly interested in the concept of vitality, which is the energy that is available to the self. That is the energy that is exhilarating and empowering that allows people to act more autonomously and persist more at important activities. So, part of the reason why I answered the question, are black males self motivated, with an absolute no, is that historically and currently, how much vitality are black males, allow? How much energy are they being left with to themselves? How much energy that is exhilarating and empowering being left for black men to use in ways that they see fit and the most important activities to them? Now, if I go with my own personal anecdotes, and of course, anecdotes are not, reliable and valid research, but even when I've done reliable and valid research, I still see the same um, black men burning it on both ends. It's kind of John Henryism when it comes to our energy. So, what motivation theory says is you can be, autonomously motivated by, introject, the integration and this kind of, identifying with the task. You don't necessarily have to be controlled, and it doesn't have to be your goal. You can actually integrate yourself into a institution, corporation, or organization, and you'll still feel this kind of autonomous motivation because you are still achieving goals or completing activities that you identify and give you a sense of self. But even after that, there should be some energy available to you, or vitality left, for you to feel exhilarated and empowered, and for you to do the things that you want to see fit, that you see as important. Black males have not been given that opportunity in the United States of America. For them to to be a black male in America, oftentimes your energy is seen as energy that someone else can use. Your effort is seen as something that needs to be driving either behind some work, some John Henryism work, or even just pure, being driven behind just family and the providing and protecting of a family. What energy is left to yourself from doing all those things? And this is something that SDT is talking about. That if you are constantly motivated, you're going to have energy that you have left to yourself. All human beings are going to leave something to themselves for them to feel exhilarated and empowered and to feel that kind of, you know, this is why I do it. This is why I do it, because this is really contributing to something that I really hold dear and I really hold personal to myself. And I'm going to go ahead and finish up this. Um, Continue reading. Whereas other theories have posited that self-regulation and choice are draining of energy, SET researchers have hypothesized, excuse me, slow on down, SET researchers have hypothesized and demonstrated that only controlled regulation depletes energy. Let me say that again. SET researchers have hypothesized and demonstrated that only controlled regulation depletes energy. In other words, when you have somebody else, an outside force, whether it be a person or entity or policy, that is the only regulation of behaviors, that's what's taking away some of your vitality. That's what's depleting your energy at a high rate. Okay, autonomous regulation is not depleting, but can instead be vitalizing. In other words, it can add energy if you have your own, check-in of behavior. And indeed, STT posits that whereas control motives drain energy, actions that lead to need satisfaction can actually enhance energy available for self-regulation. So what Desi and Ryan really do is present motivation as this kind of whole mechanism of machines, and we could take different pieces out, and people will still move and shake, but how that happens and how people feel while that's happening is important. So if individuals want to, self-regulate behavior, in other words, you don't have to be, over people's back, making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. You need to make sure they feel autonomous, because if they don't feel autonomous, their energy is going to be drained through the control. The energy is also being drained by controlled regulation. In other words, somebody, a supervisor or a security guard or whoever's on duty, coming over your shoulder saying, get back on task, get back on task, get back on task. All this is sucking the energy out of the room, not only out of the room, but out of individuals and what energy they have left to either complete the task, attend to activities, or accomplish goals. So I find that interesting that individuals actually get more energy to do more in the future from feeling autonomous. When you feel like you've had your own regulation of your own behavior uh, in activities, and you have determination on what's going to happen next, you get more energy to keep doing it. It's a certain satisfaction of that car driving. I'm talking about competence, autonomy, and relatedness that makes you want to drive the car more. You're actually going to be more self-determined when you get an opportunity to be self-determined. And I find that amazing. That's the reason why we use SDT as the theory to talk about, can people be motivated on their own? Can people do what they want to do? Yes, it can still contribute to a larger group society and group motivation, and we'll talk about that in future episodes, because that's where my bread and butter really is. It's not necessarily in individual differences, but talking about group and cultural motivation. I may make that my next show, just talking about cultural motivation, what that really means. But according to Desi and Ryan, like, if you want to have energy after work, work needs to make you feel autonomous. Work needs to make you feel like what you're doing means something not only to yourself, but that you identify with the goals of the corporation, institution, organization. And if they want you to feel more energy every day you come back, they need that autonomous feeling to maintain itself. Again, that last line said that autonomous regulation doesn't deplete energy. It actually vitalizes energy. It actually provides more energy than was there before to keep checking in on yourself, to keep yourself going to complete these tasks, complete these goals, and attending these activities. I think that's amazing. So one thing we're trying to figure out as we dive into high school on this channel is black male motivation and what that really means. My first couple episodes, 1 and 2, have been about, are black men self-motivated? For me, is unequivocally no. Not because they don't want to be self-motivated, but self-motivation and self-determination, according to Desi and Ryan, requires an environment and a context that also supports, competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And while competence and relatedness have been attended to for the black male, the thing that oftentimes becomes the issue is autonomy. And autonomy is going to be connected to concepts like mindfulness, concepts like origin of causality. Um, Autonomy is a basic psychological need for health and well-being, and that autonomy is going to be connected to vitality. So, if you can answer the question that black males are autonomous with a yes, then you could say that black men are self-motivated. I would need more context and evidence of that based on your opinion, but I'm willing to listen. according to me and what I've studied, I say if self-determination theory has two types of motivation, autonomous and control. Where would I, according to what I've, researched as well as um, seen empirically, we will find black men more so in controlled motivation where they're going to have the knowledge and skills. They're going to be even connected to people through a network. But when it comes to can they make decisions, as one of my favorite artists say, can you make shit move? Can you make things go up and go down? Do you have energy left over for yourself for what you really want to do if you so choose? Those are the ways in which you answer the question: Are black males self motivated? And my question to society or push to society is making sure that with our black boys and black men, we're providing avenues and spaces and resources and resources and resources for black boys and men, black males to feel the autonomous motivation that everyone else gets a chance to feel. Okay, it's not going to necessarily be one set fits all, but we find ourselves when it comes to black males making excuses for why we can't give them that autonomy. Well, they just don't want to do it. Oftentimes these things have been shaped and crystallized over periods of time where even the black males may not be accustomed to autonomous motivation. They may be used to and seeking control motivation situations, and that's a whole different conversation to be had. But I'm gonna wrap it up here. I'm over here at about 56 minutes here in high school. I'm not gonna over talk y'all. I've given a pretty solid one today, I believe. We'll probably dive back in there talking about group motivation. At least try to set some groundwork for you to look into it on your own when it comes to group or cultural motivation. But this has been all about self-determination theory again, competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Again, if you like what I did today here on our show, please like, share, subscribe. If you would like to support this lecture and tip a scholar, please tip a scholar at the Cash App at Dr. QB. Doctor spelled out the regular way, QB, those two letters. And hey, man, we'll talk to you, not about you. Y'all holla.